Hi there, it's Louise here of Timeless Craft Mama, and today I'm sharing a mixed media canvas with you created for the DLIsh Scraps Simply Chic mood board, and this from April 2016. So I'm going to show you first of all my finalised canvas, and I instantly knew that I wanted to do a canvas for this mood board, and I just love dream catchers. They are something that I find so beautiful and so inspiring. So what I've done for this mood board is I've actually made a kind of creation, I don't know what you call it, it's kind of a half a canvas but half a dream catcher as well. So the first thing I'm going to do is I'm going to unpack some of the really awesome stuff that comes in that DLIsh Scraps Just Add Paper kit, and I've also got a few little extra bits and pieces from them as well. So I'm going to pull a few of those out and some items from my stash, which you'll also see some of them don't get used and some of them do. So the main piece is going to be that doily that I picked up from a craft store, and I've had it in my stash for a while and didn't really know what I was going to do with it. I initially thought I was going to cut it up and sort of spread it around a page layout, but I'm really so pleased with how it's come out in this particular canvas, sorry. So the first thing I'm doing is having a look at the colours that make up the mood palette, and I've gone ahead and pre-prepped my canvas with some gesso. So that's already done. I didn't bother to record that for you. So I'm also then just spreading around that colour that I've created. So I've just used hot pink because I didn't have any pale pink in my stash, and I've combined it with ordinary white and antique white. So that's what's given me kind of that lot paler look. If I hadn't used the antique white, I would have been left with a lot pinker sort of colour because I'd used that hot pink acrylic to start with. So the next step is to go ahead and take this stencil, and I'm just sponging some grey colour through that stencil. Now when I look back at this layout, so hindsight, it's this wonderful thing, isn't it? I really should have lightened the colour of that grey because the mood board was quite a bit lighter, but I think in the final product of the layout you don't get so much of it, so it's not as bad as like what it looks like right now. So I have some of this leftover pink paint that I created, and what I'm doing is I'm adding some texture sand by Prima, and that texture sand will then create sort of a thicker paste which I'm going to use to stencil around this canvas. And again, in hindsight, maybe I should have lightened it a shade because the even though it's textured and it does actually add to this layout, I feel like it kind of got a little bit lost because I'd already used that pink background. So I really should have lightened it up a little bit more. Now again, I've also saved some of that pink that I created earlier, so I'm just using that to build the background of this layout. So I've just added some water, and I'm going to sprinkle that around onto the canvas just to create some interest. Now, I've gone ahead and let that dry, and then I've decided that this doily is a good base for what will be the sort of the central dream catcher element of this particular canvas. So I got some just cardstock that had come, I think it was actually like the lining of some paper kits or something, like you know how you get those bits of card that come to keep your paper stable. It was just literally a piece of scrap card that I had lying around, but it was quite thick, so it was good enough that I simply took a plate out of my kitchen and I cut around, like drew around it with a pencil and cut it to create the sort of circle for my dream catcher. So just because I'm using lots of elements on this, and I wasn't quite happy with the colour of that doily, I'm just adding a coat of gesso just to kind of lighten it up, blend it in, so that when I'm ready and I'm going to add some colour to it, it's going to soak that colour up. So please excuse me while I go ahead and I clean up the mess that I've made here. I'm going to return to this layout and you'll see just having a little bit of a play around with some of the elements that came in the kit. We've got a couple of doilies, some flare buttons, some craft wire. I'm also having a look at the sketch, so making sure that I'm sort of staying within the boundaries of the sketch as well. And I know it's not compulsory, it's more about the mood palette with DLIsh Scraps, but I really also like using the sketch. I find sketches are easy to work with and they give you that sort of starting point for inspiration. Now, because I knew that I was going to cover up the center of this, let's call it a dream catcher, even though I know it's not an actual dream catcher. So even though I knew I was going to cover up the center, so I have just cut that, and I'm just threading some twine around, again, just to make a point of interest, and it doesn't have to be particularly tidy. It was really just to, again, come back to looking a little bit like what a dream catcher would. So I've taken a couple of ribbons from my stash, and again, I'm going to edit most of this out because it's pretty straightforward to see what I'm doing here as far as adding ribbons to the bottom of the Dreamcatcher. Now, what I also did, which you'll get to see later as far as down that bottom section is concerned, I also added just some of the washi tape that came in the Just Add paper kit and some that I had in my stash as well. They were a good addition because I just folded the washi tape onto itself and again just tied that around. So, a couple more elements I'm adding here just to, again, build a background. So you saw me spray some white mist around and use some droplets as well. And this is sort of just to tone down some of that grey, tone down some of that pink because it is fairly bright still. And this sort of helps blend all of these layers together. And, I mean, most of this gets covered up, as you can see, but for me, that's how I find I build layouts. I build and add and then keep building and adding, and maybe you don't see everything, and maybe sometimes you cover things up that you really liked as part of a layout, but that's just part of designing a background. So these are just some little freestyle hand-drawn circles with gelatos, one in a pink and one in a grey and then one in a white as well. So I'm just looking at what's showing through and making sure that this layout is starting to have a really nice chic background. Okay, now you'll see me starting to put some of the elements of this layout together, and one of them is this quote. So stay strong, stay beautiful, be yourself, believe. And when I make a canvas to hang up in my home, to hang up in my craft studio, on my wall, to give to somebody as a gift, I really want it to be inspirational. I don't just want to slap some pretty stuff onto a page. So I always include a quote that really just is feel good. So in this case, this one I really wanted to keep. So I wanted to remind myself of all those things that you'll see in the quote. Now again, hindsight, I really wanted this to be a lot darker as far as the pink is concerned, but I did colour it with the gelato and then popped some clear embossing powder over the top and heat embossed that just to give it that little touch of pink, and I probably should have used some acrylic paint just to make it a bit darker, but when it's close up in the actual canvas itself, you do actually get a touch of that pink, so it probably doesn't stand out as much as I'd like it to, but it definitely is still a really nice touch, that chipboard piece. So I've gone ahead and I've just distressed the edges of the quote in the center, and then I'm going to take some of this glass bead gel. And this is the first time I've actually used it, so I wasn't really sure how it was going to turn out. I saw a lady use it on a video, and it looked so cool, the way it dried and the way it accepted colour after it was dry. So I'm going to go ahead and apply some of that through a stencil, and I applied it quite thick because the beads in it are thick as well. So it's while that's drying, You can't see the texture, but in some of the close-ups that I give you at the end of the video, you'll see some of that texture. So a little bit more pink splattered around now that I'm sort of worked out where the boundaries of this layout are, and I've added some of that texture as far as paste and colours. I just want to go over the top with some of those pink splatters as well. So the layout is pretty much coming together exactly as I want it to. Mostly I'm just sort of building around the layers ready to put the final touches to this piece and then add some of the embellishments that come with the kit. Okay, now as this is my first sort of mixed media canvas that I've done a video for, I'm going to talk you through some of my process. Now you'll see that in some places, and I've just given you a little visual of that Dreamcatcher tail. So sorry for the distraction there. So in some places you'll see I'm using tacky glue depending on what I'm adhering, but for this larger sort of stuff, like the Dreamcatcher itself and those ribbons at the bottom, I am actually going to use my hot glue gun just because it gives a stronger set, and it also just it dries quicker. So as I'm working through this, I'm not likely to be moving much around, so I'm happy enough to stick things down as they go onto the canvas. Whereas with a layout, sometimes you get that desire to move a piece. So for some things I will stick them down with the tacky glue, and some I will do them with the hot glue gun. Okay, now I'm going to play with some of these elements, and I've picked a few things out of my stash, a couple of different flowers, some ribbons. I've got some DLIsh accessories going on here, some flare buttons, a few little bits and pieces. So what you'll see in the video now is me just playing around with a few different things, and once I'm happy with the layout, I will then start to glue everything down and move on to the final stages. Now, before I'd even actually received the kit in the mail, I'd seen the mood board, but I didn't know what was actually inside the kit. So I'd seen the sketch, I'd seen the mood board, but I didn't know what elements I would have to work with. So I was really happy when the kit turned up, and that happy mail feeling where you pop something open and you're really inspired by the things that are inside of it. So I was really pleased to see that there was lots of flowers, lots of pinks and whites, and just items that I knew I could work with and that would be really fantastic on top of or as a feature of this mixed media canvas that I've put together. And the wire was a really good touch as well. The wire just added that little extra element that you don't often think of. Twine I think of all the time, but wire is not something that I often think of to pop onto a layout. So I really enjoyed playing with the wire on this one. Thanks for popping that in the kit. So once I'm happy, I've got this little cluster in the bottom right, and again you'll notice that a lot of that grey has disappeared behind embellishments and layers and different areas of this particular page. So it's not necessarily a bad thing to have that there and then cover it up later. That's the idea of mixed media, to me anyway, is if you add something and then you don't like it, it's really easy to cover it up. So the final steps that I'm doing here are to pop some of these embellishments and glue them down, and of course the hot glue gun runs out of glue at the worst possible time. So I'm just gluing a few things in place. You'll notice that I did leave off some of those ribbons that I'd pulled out of my stash. They just weren't working, so I left them alone. Now I also just want to mention, while I'm going ahead and gluing some of this stuff down, is that this particular mixed media canvas was completed over about 6 nights. So I've mentioned in some of my other videos, but I will just say it again, that I don't use my heat gun a lot. I like to let my layers dry naturally overnight. So when I work on a mixed media background, whether it be for something like this, a canvas or a layout, I will actually take a fair amount of time to do one, purely because I like my layers to dry naturally. So while I'm letting a layer dry, I will actually go ahead and work on something else. So on my desk at any one time, I could have, 5 or 6 different projects all in different stages of layers drying. So that's just a personal preference for me, and everybody will do something different. But I just wanted to mention that, you could complete this in a shorter time period if you were to go ahead and dry some of those layers with a heat gun. Moving on to the final stages of this canvas now, I have painted that flower that was kind of a off-white colour, and I've just used that same pink acrylic, watered down with some gesso, and then I've just used silver liquid pearls and just smudged that around on that flower just to help it build into this layout a little bit more. A couple of little drops of that liquid pearl around the layout, and it's all finished and done. So I'm going to show you a couple of close-ups here, some of the photos in the natural light, which will certainly help you see it a little bit better. I hope you've enjoyed this something different mixed media canvas from me, and if you'd like to see more, certainly leave me a comment. I hope you enjoyed. Thanks for stopping by.